Love or immigration? 4. Farah vaulted to her feet, startling Ali. Her hand clutched the pink linen napkin as though it were a lifeline, and her dark eyes filled with tears. Farah! I can't do it. I can't go through with it. You expect me to share a bed and for us to live like a normal married couple, but I just can't do it. I lied. Everything's a lie. I'm sorry, Ali, truly sorry. You agreed to my terms, he reminded her without rancor. She was pale and trembling, and it disturbed him to see her in such emotional torment. He would have liked to take her in his arms and comfort her, but he could see she wouldn't welcome his touch. I was overwrought. I didn't know what I was doing. Everything happened so fast. Ali considered her words and slowly shook his head. You knew. She retreated a couple of steps. I've had a change of heart. It's understandable, given the circumstances. It pained him to see her so distraught, but she'd willingly agreed to his stipulations, and there'd been ample opportunity for her to speak her mind before the wedding. Calmly he pointed this out. You didn't have to go through with the ceremony, but you did, he said. You wanted this marriage, but you refused to admit it even to yourself. He stared at her, demanding that she relent and recognize her foolishness. They were married, and she was his wife. There was no going back now. I felt I had no choice. Salman was convinced that marrying you was the only way to keep you in the country. My grandmother's dying and she likes you, believes in you, and it seemed, I don't know, it just felt like the right thing to do at the time. But now it doesn't, he asked calmly, despite his mounting frustration. No, she said emphatically. It doesn't feel the least bit right. Ali rubbed his hand over his chin as he contemplated her words. You Pakistanis have many sayings I do not understand. There is one expression I remember and it seems to fit this situation. What's that? Hogwash. Farah went speechless. Once she'd composed herself, she tilted her head regally and glared at him. Ali suspected she used this cold, haughty regard to intimidate those who dared to differ with her. A mere look was incapable of daunting him or distracting him from his purpose. It was apparent. His bride had much to learn about him. Have you so little pride, she asked disdainfully, that you'd hold me to an agreement I made when I was emotionally distraught? Ali was impressed with her ability to twist an argument. Pride, he echoed slowly. I am a proud man. But what are you, Farah? Have you so little honor that you would renege on an agreement made in good faith and expect me to accept weak excuses? Her face reddened and she slumped into her chair. I've fulfilled my part of the bargain, he continued. Is it wrong or unjust to expect you to live up to yours? I think not. You have what you wanted, what you needed. Therefore, shouldn't you satisfy my demands? She scowled at him, and even though an entire room separated them, Ali could feel the heat of her outrage. You ask too much, she muttered. All I ask is that you be my wife, share my life and bear our children. Tears marked her pale cheeks. You have every right to be angry, every right to curse me, but I can't be your wife the way you want. It's too late to change your mind. His voice was flat and hard. We are married. You spoke your vows, you signed your name to the document. There is no turning back now. I suggest you forget this foolishness and finish your meal. Please try to understand. This isn't easy for me, either. I've been sick with guilt. I don't want to cheat you. I never wanted that. Ali sighed, his patience shrinking. You're beginning to sound like a disobedient child. You're correct about one thing, she said, gesturing beseechingly with her hands. I should have said something sooner. I should never have gone through with the ceremony, but it's not too late. I'm saying something now. We are married. He sat down at the table and reached for his fork. He refused to give her the satisfaction of thinking her arguments had troubled him. In abject frustration, Farah threw her hands in the air. You're impossible. Perhaps, he said readily enough. But you are my wife and, as you yourself have agreed, you shall remain so. Without another word she stormed out of the dining room. He heard her in the kitchen banging around pots and pans, but couldn't tell what she was doing. He finished his meal, although his appetite had long since deserted him. He heard her trying to make a phone call, but whoever she called didn't answer. From his chair, he witnessed her frustration when he saw her replace the receiver and lean her forehead against the wall. His dinner finished, Ali returned to the kitchen to find Farah busily rinsing dishes and placing them in the dishwasher. She ignored him for several minutes, until he said, "Shall we prepare for bed?" Farah froze, then turned and stared at him. Are you crazy? Each word was spoken slowly, as if he didn't understand English. No, he answered thoughtfully. I am a husband. Yours. I'm sorry, Ali, she said, her face pale, her voice shaking. I know I should have spoken up. Before the ceremony I've put in a call to my brother. As soon as possible I'll make whatever arrangements are necessary to have our marriage annulled. Ali didn't swallow the bait. Salman Chaudhry was not only his friend but an attorney and had sanctioned this marriage with his sister. In fact, he'd encouraged it from the beginning. Although Salman hadn't shared his concerns with Ali, he was convinced Farah's brother was worried about her. Whenever Salman mentioned Farah's name his eyes clouded. After working with her these past 2 years, Ali understood her brother's anxiety. She was aggressive, domineering and driven. In themselves those weren't negative attributes, especially for a woman in a competitive business, but Ali had noticed something else. Farah Chaudhry had closed off her life from everything that didn't involve Chaudhry Industries. Perhaps he was a fool, but Ali saw this woman as a challenge. More than that, he liked Farah and with very little effort could find himself in love with her. Already he admired her and was attracted to her, he longed for the day she'd feel the same about him. No, Ali reasoned, Salman wouldn't give in to her dictates. He would be unemotional, reasonable. Ali knew they couldn't count on the same behavior from Farah. Smiling to himself, he decided he rather looked forward to the battle of wills. Ali had met Salman years earlier while the young Pakistani had travelled across Europe. Together they'd spent a restless day in a train station. Eager to learn what he could of Pakistan, Ali had questioned him and found they shared several interests. Ali had liked Salman. They'd corresponded over the years and Ali had shared his frustration with his country and his work. Salman had offered Ali employment soon after the fire that had nearly destroyed Chaudhry Industries. It had taken them almost a year to secure the necessary visa for him to live in the Pakistan. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Farah asked. "I'm arranging an annulment." "Yes, my love." "I am not your love," she cried, sounding close to tears. "Perhaps not now," he returned confidently, "but you will be soon. Sooner than you realize." "Ah, Farah," he said, "we will have such marvelous children." Ali knew when her eyes drifted shut that she wasn't envisioning their offspring, but was desperately fighting to hold on to her temper. Once she accepted their marriage, he told himself, she would be a splendid lover. Already he'd experienced the passion that simmered within her. Soon, in her own time, she would come to him and he'd be waiting. Ali sauntered back into the living room, turned on the television and sat back to watch the nightly news. No man had ever infuriated her more. Farah had needed every ounce of courage she'd ever possessed to confront him with the Natia. But he'd been so blasé about it, as if he'd expected her to default on their agreement. As if he'd been calmly waiting for her to defy him. Then to have him casually announce it was too late to change her mind? That was too much. She'd rather rot in jail than make love to such an uncaring, ill-tempered, scheming. Suddenly she felt tired. If anyone had been scheming, she was the one. Exhaustion permeated her bones, and it was almost more than she could do to finish the dishes. Ali sat in her living room, watching television. Undaunted, confident, sure of himself. "I'm going to bed," she said shakily, praying he wouldn't follow her. Ali reached for the remote and turned off the television. He was on his feet, trailing her into the master bedroom, before she had time to protest. "I'm very tired." Her eyes pleaded with him. If she couldn't reason with him, then perhaps she could evoke sympathy. Bottom of the barrel compassion was all she had left. "I'm tired, as well." He stood at the opposite side of her bed and unfastened the buttons of his shirt. Farah felt like weeping. "You expect to sleep in here? You are my wife. Please." Her voice cracked. He didn't pause in his movements, tugging the shirt free from his waist. "I can't sleep with you." Her words were low and barely audible. He turned back the bed covers. "We are married, Farah, and we will share this room. You needn't worry that I will make any unwelcome advances. I'm certain that in time you'll come to me. You will, you know, and when you do, I'll be waiting. I can be patient when the prize is of such high value." The presumptuousness of the man continued to astound her. "I can't sleep with you," she repeated. I am not a monster, Farah, but a man. He stopped and looked at her as if expecting her to argue further. I don't understand you, she cried, nearly hysterical. I've cheated you and lied to you. Why do you still want me? You should be glad to be rid of me. You are my wife. It demanded all of Farah's energy just to hold up her head. This man confused her and she lacked the resources to go on arguing. He pulled back the sheets and rearranged the pillows on his side of the bed, making certain she understood that he wouldn't be dissuaded. I can't think clearly, she said, holding her hands to her cheeks. I'll sleep in the guest bedroom. His disappointment was obvious. You're sure? She nodded. For now. As you wish, then. Listlessly she moved around the foot of the single bed. She'd made a mess of this marriage from the beginning. Farah. His voice was softly accented and warmly masculine. Something in the way he said her name gave her pause. I'm so sorry, she said before he could speak. She could hear the tears in her voice. For what? She shrugged. For another failure. For dragging him into a loveless marriage with a cold, unwilling wife. For countless unconfessed sins. You've spent today and many others before it fighting yourself. You're weary of the battle. Aren't you? Farah nodded. He was behind her, moving closer. She should leave now, walk away from him. Before he started to make sense, before he convinced her there was hope. She couldn't allow it to happen, because ultimately she would disappoint him. Even hurt him. I am your husband, he whispered once more as he turned her into his arms. Let me carry your burdens and lighten your load. I'm here to be your helpmate, your friend, your lover. Let me take care of you, Farah. Let me love you. As he spoke, his mouth was drawing closer and closer to hers, until their breath mingled. As hard as she tried, Farah couldn't dredge up a single protest when his mouth settled firmly on hers. He kissed her the way a woman dreams a man will kiss her, with a tenderness that touched some long-hidden spark within her. And then he altered the kiss, making it hot and fierce. He buried his hands deep in her hair. Ali sighed and her name spilled from his lips. His voice was filled with need. With unbridled desire. Be my wife. Farah's eyes fluttered open. It took her a second to comprehend what he'd said. When she did, she stared at him, unable to speak. Her heart was pounding, tapping out a dire warning. One she should heed. I need time. He continued to hold her gaze. All right. Tears filled her eyes and she bit her lip. You're getting the short end of the stick with me, Ali. Short end of the stick. She smiled softly. It means you're getting less than you deserve. Let me be the judge of that. As I said, in time you'll come to me of your own accord. In time. You'll want me as much as I want you. There are many things you don't know about me, she said, her words so low he had to strain to hear. Tell me. She shook her head. Just remember, I warned you. He released her, maintaining their contact as long as possible. His hand slid down the full length of her arms and, catching her fingers, he held on to the tips with his own. "Good night, my wife," he whispered, then turned away. "I shall be lonely without you." Farah left the room quickly, knowing that if she stayed a moment longer, she'd end up in the bed next to Ali. Farah found it surprisingly easy to avoid Ali. Their schedules were different and they drove to work in separate cars. She left for the office early, before he awoke. In the afternoons she visited her grandmother, then ate a quiet meal by herself. She was usually preparing for bed about the time Ali returned from the lab. He was working long, hard hours, getting ready to put his latest research into production. From the weekly reports he sent her, she knew that they were speeding ahead, the marketing and distribution plans for Phoenix Paints were underway. The advertising blitz had yet to be decided, but that was coming. Everything looked promising. But then, it had looked promising 3 years ago, too. Yet within the course of a single week, she'd lost her father, been betrayed by the man she loved and nearly destroyed a business that had been in the family for 4 generations. Farah had learned harsh but valuable lessons about promises. Probably the most painful lessons of her life. She'd come away convinced she could trust only a cherished few. Equally important, she'd learned never, ever to cash in on mere potential. The promise of a check in the mail wasn't money in the bank. Dear heavens, she mused as she left the office, she was becoming very philosophical. Perhaps that was what marriage did to a woman. Marriage. Even the word sounded strange to her. She was married for better or worse. Married. After her tirade on their wedding night, when she'd pleaded, threatened, and tried to reason with Ali, she'd decided he was right. There was no backing out now. They were married, for better or worse. Her decision was prompted by a certain amount of pride. Salman had made sure the news of their wedding was carried by the local newspapers. The business community and their acquaintances would know about her marriage. It would be acutely embarrassing to seek an annulment so soon after the ceremony. Mentally she added vanity to her growing list of character defects. "Farah," Natia said weakly when she entered the hospital room, "what are you doing here?" Farah grinned as she leaned forward to kiss her grandmother's pale cheek. "It's good to see you, too. Ali will never forgive me." "Ali is hard at work," she assured Natia. "But you're newlyweds." Farah's gaze skirted past her grandmother's. "He's been so busy lately. I'd rather spend time with you than go home to an empty apartment." "I worry about you," Natia said, her voice growing weaker. "Worry?" Farah repeated. "There's no need. Our schedules are hectic just now. Coming here is the best thing for me that way. When Ali gets home, I'm calm and relaxed." "Good. He's such a dear boy. You married well. I so want you to be happy. It's what you deserve. Your season of pain is past now that you have Ali." Farah wanted to avoid the subject of her husband. "Would you like me to read to you?" "Please." From the Book of Psalms, if you would. Of course. Farah reached for the well-worn Bible and sat in the chair next to her grandmother's bed and began. She read long past the moment Natia had fallen asleep. Long past the dinner hour. Long past the time she should leave for home. The night was hot and muggy, the air heavy. Her air conditioning system must not be working properly because it felt like the hottest night of the year. Even her skimpy, baby doll pajamas seemed clammy and constricting. Sleep seemed just beyond her grasp no matter how hard she tried to capture it. The night was still and dark, and she flopped from her side to her back, then onto her side once more, attempting to find the touch of a cool breeze. But there was none. Another hour passed and she gave up the effort. Getting out of bed, she moved into the living room, standing in front of the window. A few scattered lights flickered from Puget's Sound. The last ferry crossing before dawn, she guessed. Farah had no idea how long she stood there, looking into the still, dark night. Raising her arms high above her head, she stretched, standing on her toes. The thin fabric of her pajama top rustled. Her hair felt damp and heavy and she lifted the long tresses from the back of her neck. She shook her head, sending a spray of hair in a circle around her face. She heard the briefest of noises behind her and whirled around to see a shadow unfold from the chair. Ali stood. He wore only the bottom half of his pajamas and his hard chest glistened in the muted light. Ali, she said breathlessly. I couldn't sleep, either, he told her. How long have you been here? She demanded. I wasn't spying on you, if that's what you're insinuating. You startled me, that's all. Come sit with me. She shook her head again and watched as his jaw tightened at her refusal. We're married, he reminded her. You can't ignore me the rest of your life. We made a bargain, which has yet to be fulfilled. Why he chose to bring up the subject of their marriage now, Farah didn't know. They'd lived peacefully together for nearly 2 weeks, barely seeing each other, rarely talking. She'd almost convinced herself they could continue like this forever. I don't want to talk about our marriage. She sensed that his irritation turned to amusement. No, I don't imagine you do, he said. I'm sorry I didn't mean to snap at you. It's just that I didn't realize you were here. Fine. I forgive you. Now sit and we can talk. Farah hesitated, then decided it would do more harm than good to refuse him. She sank onto the sofa across from him. Holding a decorative pillow to her stomach helped ease her discomfort over her state of undress, although not by much. How is your grandmother? About the same. I talked to her doctor this afternoon and he said. She paused, biting her lip. He said we shouldn't expect her to return home. Is she in pain? Yes, sometimes, although she tries to hide it from me. Listen, do you mind if we don't talk about Natia, either? Of course not. I didn't mean to bring up a subject that causes you distress. Farah lowered her eyes. It's just that she's so important to me. Natia's all the family Salman and I have left. Your mother died years ago, didn't she? Farah wasn't surprised. He knew that, since he and Salman had been friends since her brother's college days, when they'd met in Europe. When I was 15, and as you probably recall, my father, she added, died 3 years ago shortly after the fire. Silence stretched between them. Farah's pressure on the pillow increased. Even in the darkened room, she could feel his smoldering gaze move caressingly over her. He wanted her and was growing impatient. Her heart pounded with dread and some other emotion. Regret? Perhaps yearning? Please don't look at me like that, she begged. It seemed as if his eyes were about to devour her. He wanted her to know how much he longed to make love to her. The memory of his kisses returned to haunt her, and she tried to dispel the image before it took root in her mind and her heart. "You're very beautiful." She'd heard those meaningless words before. Beauty was fleeting and counted for little of real value in life. Being outwardly attractive hadn't made her a better judge of character. It didn't do one iota of good as far as her grandmother's health was concerned. If anything, it had been a curse. Because it attracted the wrong kind of man. "This makes you sad?" She shrugged. "Beauty means nothing. You are wise to recognize that. Then why do you mention it?" "Because you were not beautiful, not in the same way, when we first met. It's only recently that I've come to appreciate that you are a real woman." "A real woman?" Farah nearly laughed aloud. "This is what makes being married to you and not sleeping with you so difficult. Have you reconsidered yet, my love? Come with me, share my bed." "I can't. Please don't ask me." Her response was immediate. Tossing the pillow aside, she leapt to her feet, needing to escape. "Good night, Ali." He didn't answer, and she didn't look back as she rushed to her room. Her heart was roaring in her ears when she reached the bed. Not for the first time she felt like the fox in an English hunt, and the baying of the hounds was closing in on her. "Farah!" She nearly fell off the bed when she looked up and found Ali framed in her doorway. Her breath froze in her lungs. "Someday you won't run from me." "I wasn't running from you." It was a lie, and they both knew it, yet Farah persisted in claiming otherwise. His smile was more than a little cocky. "Someday you will come to me voluntarily." She wasn't going to argue with him. He watched her closely in the muted moonlight, and she studied him with equal intensity. She suddenly realized her top had inched up and exposed her breasts. Furiously she tugged it down, glaring at him as though he'd purposely arranged the immodest display. He smiled roguishly at her. "As I said earlier, you are very beautiful." Then he turned and left. After a sleepless, frustrating night, Farah was in no mood to deal with a long list of complicated problems. Lubna, her middle-aged assistant, looked apologetic when Farah arrived at the office early the next morning. "Please get my brother on the line when you can," Farah said. Her mind was made up. She wanted out of this farce of a marriage. "He's already called for you." Lubna hugged a file folder against her chest. "He asked that you call him the moment you got here." Farah reached for her phone and punched out the extension. Salman answered on the first ring. "Come down to my office," he said impatiently. "Now. Right now. What's wrong? You'll find out soon enough." This morning was quickly going from bad to worse, much like her life. She paused, catching herself. Her thoughts hadn't always been this negative. When had it started? The wedding? No, she decided long before then. 3 years before she wondered why she was so aware of it now. She rounded the corner that led to the suite of offices her brother occupied on the floor below her own. "Salman, what's this all about?" she asked before she noticed Ali. She halted when she saw her husband sitting in one of the visitors' chairs, waiting for her. "Sit down." Her brother motioned toward Ali. Farah did as he asked. Salman paced back and forth behind his desk. "I was contacted this morning by the immigration people. I knew this would happen, I just didn't expect it to be quite so soon. We're being investigated," Ali murmured. Salman nodded. "The two of you are going to have to convince them you're madly in love. Do you think you can do it?" Farah saw that he focused his gaze on her. "Ah. Yes," Ali responded without hesitation. "Farah, what about you?" She'd never been good with pretense. "She'll convince them." Ali revealed far more confidence in her than she had in herself. "It won't take much effort." He reached for her hand, gripping it in his own. "All we need is a little practice, isn't that right, Farah?"